How does a boy who cannot speak his own name without flinching become one of the most recognizable human beings on earth? What lives beneath the rubber face, behind the bulging eyes and the contemptuous sneer that made billions laugh? What happens when the very condition that built your genius also dismantles your peace quietly, year after year, until you are standing in a field in Oxfordshire wondering who you actually are when the cameras stop rolling? To understand all of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to County Durham in the northeast of England, to 1955, and to a boy who learned in the cruelest way possible that the safest place in the world was somewhere deep inside another person's skin. Rowan Sebastian Atkinson was born on January 6, 1955 in Consett, a small industrial town in County Durham, England. His father, Eric Atkinson, was a farmer and businessman, a practical, grounded man of the North. His mother, Ella May, kept the household running with quiet northern stoicism. The landscape of Rowan's childhood was made of gray skies, flat farmland, and the particular loneliness of a place where ambition had no obvious exit. There were no theater connections, no creative industry waiting at the end of the road. No one in Consett in 1955 was mapping a route to television studios. Rowan was the youngest of 4 brothers, which sounds like warmth, sounds like built-in companionship. But youngest sons in large, rural, traditional families often find that the most important conversations are already over by the time they arrive. His father, Eric, was not cruel. He was simply remote, in the way that men of that generation and geography were remote, as though emotional expression was a frivolity the North could not afford. His mother provided steadiness. But there was no luxury, no industry connection, no paved road to fame. There was, however, something more powerful than all of that. There was a child who felt the world too intensely and had almost no way to say so. Because Rowan Atkinson had a stutter. Not a mild hesitation, not a social nervousness that a kind teacher could smooth over with patience. A genuine physiological stutter that seized his words mid-flight and dragged them down before they could reach anyone. The technical name is developmental stuttering. And for a boy in a northern English school in the early 1960s, there was no clinical language to soften it. There was only the pause, the sound of breath catching and never releasing cleanly. In classrooms, he did not raise his hand, not because he did not know the answer, because the moment of speaking was its own small humiliation, a performance he had not consented to give. The social consequences were precise and merciless. Other boys in school found the stutter useful, the way children always find the specific wound useful, the thing that makes someone flinch predictably. Years later, when people would search online, asking questions like, is Mr. Bean autistic, or trying to understand the silence behind the character, they were touching the edge of something real. Rowan learned early that silence was not just safer than ridicule. Silence was survival. He retreated inward, into observation, into a private interior world where faces and gestures and the enormous comedy of human pretension became his native language. He watched people the way naturalists watch animals. Cataloging, memorizing, filing away every absurd tick of social behavior for reasons he could not yet articulate. Years later, in a rare moment of unguarded honesty, Atkinson would confess with a voice measured carefully against old pain, "I was not a very talkative child." The stutter made everything complicated in ways that are difficult to describe if you have not experienced it. You learn to edit yourself before you even begin. At 14, what appeared to be his first real escape route was abruptly closed. Rowan had shown a genuine aptitude for science and electronics. There was a version of his future that ended in an engineering laboratory somewhere, clean and quiet and blessedly free of the social performance that terrified him. But something redirected him sharply, not an accident exactly. More like a gravitational pull toward the one arena where his particular collection of deficits and gifts could become, somehow, a unified language. He had begun attending school productions, not performing, and in the dark, something in the architecture of performance began to make a different kind of sense. He was not drawn to the words in those productions. He was drawn to the bodies, to the faces, to the way a raised eyebrow could carry more meaning than a paragraph of dialogue, to the fact that meaning could be constructed entirely from the space between sounds rather than from the sounds themselves. The boy who could not trust his own voice was watching, with growing intensity, a world where voice was optional. At 16, he performed his first sketch in front of classmates. It was physical, exaggerated, almost entirely silent. And when he finished, something extraordinary happened. The stutter vanished, as if the character he inhabited could speak freely, even though Rowan Atkinson still could not. On that improvised stage, he was free. It was not talent yet, it was recognition. The silent, absolute certainty of having found the place where he belonged. Only Rowan was free when pretending to be someone else. Only Mr. Bean, decades later, would allow the stuttering boy from Consett to speak to the entire world without saying a single word. At 18, with barely enough money for train fare and a second-hand suitcase containing engineering textbooks he no longer believed in, Rowan Atkinson arrived at Newcastle University. No contacts, no safety net, no backup plan. He enrolled in electrical engineering, a practical choice that pleased his father and terrified him in equal measure. Newcastle in the early 1970s was not kind to dreams. It was a city built on shipyards and coal mines, on the quiet acceptance that life was hard and ambition was a luxury reserved for those born elsewhere. The city did not welcome Rowan with applause. It welcomed him with the cold indifference of a place that had already seen too many young people arrive with hope and leave with empty hands. But Rowan found something unexpected at Newcastle. A theater group, a community of misfits who performed sketches in basement rooms to audiences of 20 people who smelled of cheap beer and cigarette smoke. Performing, creating characters whose faces did the talking when his voice could not. He did not abandon engineering. He completed his degree with distinction, then moved to Oxford for a master's degree in the same field. But at Oxford, the split deepened. By day, he studied control systems and electrical theory. By night, he performed at the Oxford University Dramatic Society, crafting sketches so visually precise that words became almost decorative. It was at Oxford in 1976 that Rowan created a character that would change everything. A schoolmaster. Physically absurd. The sketch was called The Schoolmaster, and when Rowan performed it at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, industry professionals who had ignored 1,000 young performers suddenly paid attention. The character did not rely on clever dialogue. It relied on a face that could contort into expressions of contempt so precise they felt like surgical instruments. In 1979, the BBC offered Rowan a television special. Not Just a Pretty Face aired that year, but it was the follow-up, not the 9 o'clock news, that detonated his career. The show premiered in 1979 and ran until 1982, earning Rowan a BAFTA and making him one of the most recognizable comedic voices in Britain. Voices, plural, because even when playing characters, even when his stutter was buried beneath performance, Rowan was always performing as someone else. By 1983, Rowan Atkinson was a star. He had money, recognition, critical respect. But something was missing. Something deep and unsettling that he could not articulate even to himself. He had built an entire career on characters, on masks, on the extraordinary ability to disappear into someone else. But who was Rowan when the camera stopped? The question haunted him. In 1989, Rowan pitched an idea to Thames Television, a character. Almost entirely silent. Childlike. Selfish. Absurd. A man navigating the mundane horrors of everyday life with the emotional intelligence of a toddler and the physical grace of a broken marionette. The character had no backstory, no explanation, no name initially until someone suggested calling him Bean. Mr. Bean. The executives were skeptical. British television in 1990 was built on dialogue, on wit, on verbal sparring. A silent character felt like a regression. A gamble that could humiliate everyone involved. But Rowan knew something they did not. He knew that silence was not the absence of communication. Silence was the purest form of it. Mr. Bean premiered on January 1, 1990. The first episode attracted 6 million viewers. By the end of the first series, the number had doubled. It was not just a success. It was a cultural phenomenon that transcended language, borders, and every demographic barrier television executives believed was insurmountable. Mr. Bean sold to over 200 countries. Rowan Atkinson, the stuttering boy from Consett, suddenly was the voice of millions who had never needed words to understand loneliness, frustration, and the quiet absurdity of being human. The character of Mr. Bean became so iconic that decades later people still search online, what is Mr. Bean's real name? Who played Mr. Bean? Is Mr. Bean still alive in 2025? The answers always lead back to Rowan, to a man who had weaponized his wounds into a character so universal that children in countries he had never visited knew his face better than their own politicians. But behind the red carpets and million-dollar contracts, something was beginning to crack. Rowan Atkinson had given the world Mr. Bean, but Mr. Bean had taken something from Rowan that he could never reclaim. His privacy. His peace, his ability to exist in public without being reduced to a rubber face and a teddy bear. In 1990, Rowan married Sunetra Sastry, a makeup artist he had met on the set of Blackadder. For 23 years they built a life together. 2 children, a farm in Oxfordshire. The illusion of stability. But the price of living at that level of exposure is brutal, and no one warns you when you are climbing. The absences prolonged by filming in different countries, the schedules that never aligned, the priorities that separated like 2 rivers that share an origin but end in different seas. In 2014, Sunetra filed for divorce. The news circled the world in hours. The headlines were cruel with the characteristic coldness of media that consumes lives for entertainment. For the world, it was just another celebrity story. For Rowan, it was the collapse of something he had built with his own hands for 23 years. He later admitted in a quiet interview that became a viral Mr. Bean quote, "I have always found it difficult to be myself in public. Perhaps I should have learned earlier that the same applies in private." By 2010, the industry had begun to forget him. Offers disappeared. Studios did not return calls. The man who had made billions laugh was considered a relic, a nostalgic curiosity from a previous television era. Rowan Atkinson confessed years later, "I felt invisible again, like when I was a child. The world had forgotten me." But Rowan Atkinson had survived worse things than oblivion. In 2012, at 57, he returned to Mr. Bean for a sketch at the London Olympics opening ceremony. 3 billion people watched him conduct an orchestra while daydreaming about running on a beach. It was not cheap nostalgia. It was a reminder that some forms of genius do not expire. Today, at 70 years old, Rowan Atkinson still lives quietly in Oxfordshire. He collects vintage cars. He speaks publicly about issues like free speech, articulating with precision the things he once could not say as a child. People still ask online, is Rowan Atkinson still alive? Did Mr. Bean die? The questions are strange, but understandable. The character became so large that the man behind it almost vanished entirely. The cost was not just professional. Failed marriage. Years of public scrutiny. The exhausting performance of being Rowan Atkinson performing Mr. Bean. And yet, he remained standing. Not as the invincible character of the sketches, but as the man who understood that real strength is not never falling. It is getting up every time the world knocks you down. His legacy is not Mr. Bean. It is the living proof that scars do not disqualify us. They are what make us unforgettable. From the stuttering child to the immortal icon, his story is evidence that rejection is not the end, only the prologue to something greater. What lesson do you take from Rowan Atkinson's story? How many times have you gotten up when everyone expected you to stay down? Share your reflections below and subscribe for more stories of those who transformed scars into legends. Because in the end, as Mr. Bean taught us, without ever speaking a word, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all.